friends, continuing to the chapter The Prophet of the Young Ode. Nikki's opened the notebook. Her great grandfather name was written inside the front cover. Author Green. She leafed through it. It looks more like a series of an jotting than a real journey. He had made the first enquiry at the beginning of December, just a couple of months ago, it said. 12 bar 7, some odd experiences lately might be my falling mind, but might not. We'll note them down here. Interesting, Nikki thought. She put the notebook in the stuff to keep pile. She would look it at later. Otis, in the meantime, chewed quietly on a chair leg. By the time they realized it, he had made more rather deep tooth marks. Fortunately, they were on the back legs of a chair and didn't show too much. Amanda took one of a National Geographical magazine and leafed through it. Oh Lord, look at this, she said. She held out the magazine. Open to a picture of an volcano erupting with the flames and the billows of a black smoke. This is a kind of like what the Prohibit says. Who? The Prohibit, said Amanda. Althea Towers. You haven't heard of her. She is famous. Everyone in this whole town follows her, or just about everybody. Why do we call her Prohibits? She is one, said Amanda. She propped her elbows on her knees and leaned forward. She spoke in an husky voice people use for imparting the ominous information. She saw the future in a vision. What did she see? Said Nicky. Well, she could exactly tell because it was so awful it make her sick. She could not give the hints. Like she said, fire a lot, and the explosion. It must be looked a sort of like this. Amanda tapped her finger on the volcano picture. Expect all over the world. Anyway, she took to her bed and she had been never since. That is amazing, said Nicky, but I don't understand. What did it mean? What it is like a bad dream. It was a dream, Amanda said scornfully. It was the future. I was warning. Mr. Beeson figured that out. Who is Mrs. Beeson? Nicky asked. This is a lady who lives down the street from here, and she is a real sweet, smart lady, used to be the school principal. She had a dog named Susie. You will probably see her walking this sometime. She leaned forward again. So, anyway, she said, what happened if the people have starved from the godways so that why everything is so awful and heading from the dune? But God wants to save us, so He gave us the vision to Althea. If we do right, we will be saved. And what she seen in her vision won't happen, at least not to us. So what we are supposed to do? Nicky asked. Everything the prohibit says, because it is God's order coming through here. She tells us what the things to give up. Give up? Yeah, like one thing she says a lot of is no sins, which Mrs. Beeson says means no sinners. We have to be real carefully to be good. Also, she says that no singing, no, you don't listen to the pop radio anymore, or CDs or the movies that have singing. And on the TV, we only watch the news. Otis wandered over, and Amanda reached out absently to scratch him. But why? It is not a practice not being selfish, so you have more love to give to God. Amanda sat back, looked at the Nicky in a satisfied way, and closed the National Geographical with a slap. Nicky pondered. It was true that giving the things up was something that the holy place often did. She knew that some monks and the priests gave up marriages. Some of them even gave up talkings and living their lives in silencers. In the other countries, there were a holy people who gave up the comfort beds and sleeps on the nails. People like these, she supposed, were really totally devoted to God. Maybe she herself should give something up just to see how it felt. Did you give up anything? She asked Amanda. I did, Amanda said. I gave up romance books. Mr. Beeson says that they are a waste of time anyways, so it was good to give them up. Said Nicky. It is what just the sort of an thing that fried her imagination. It was like something out of a book, the kind of a book where dark forces are trying to take over the universe and only a few valiant peoples knows how to defeat them and are brave enough to do it. She thought of her goal 3 to do something helpful for the world. Maybe giving the things up was a only way to do it. She wanted to ask more questions, but Amanda sat down the National Geographical at that point and stood up. I'm going to get me a piece of an toast, she said. Want to come? Nicky nodded. They left Otis closed into his room and went downstairs. In the kitchen, Amanda sliced the bread, and Nicky, thinking about how interesting it would be to have a vision that what she would do if she had one, put on her tea kettle for more hot chocolate. But just Amanda was getting the peanut butter out of a cupboard, thought that they haven't heard a single footstep or a knock. A face appeared at the window of the back door. A voice cried, "Hello," in a Yahoo sort of a way. And before they could move, the door opened. Mrs. Beeson, "Idla, excuse me, dears," said the woman at an Greenhaven back doors. "I thought I would stop by and say hello." She stepped inside. "In Brenda's Beeson," she said. Nicky stand. Brenda Beeson, the friend of an prophet. But she didn't look especially holy. She was a middle-aged woman, not exactly fat, but sort of an pillowy, with a round, rosy cheeks. She had an quilted red jacket, and her blue eye gleamed out from beneath the visor of an red baseball cap. She looked like a mixture of a grandmother and a soccer coach. Nicky thought, "You must be the Professor Green granddaughters," Mrs. Beeson said. "Great granddaughters," said Nicky. She told Mrs. Beeson her name. "Nicky," said Mrs. Beeson, "short for Nicole." Yes, Nicky never used her real name. Nicole, it was pretty name. She thought that, but it felt too pretty for her, since she was rather stocky and had a round chin, a short nose, and a straight, unstylish brown hair. She considered herself a smart person with a good imagination, but sort of an ordinary looking, and so Nicky felt like a better name. "Pleased to meet you," said Mrs. Beeson. "I am your neighbor. I live there houses down." Across the street, she took off her cap and stuffed it in her pockets, and Nicky saw that she had caramel colored hair pulled back in an jaunty ponytails, and she wore a little floppy earrings. Mrs. Beeson turned her gaze on Amanda. "I didn't expect to see you here, dear," she said. Amanda had backened up again the sense. She had a piece of bread in one hand and a jar of peanut butter in the other, and she looked scared. "Why haven't you left?" said Mrs. Beeson, "now that the Professor Green has passed." "I am about to go," said Amanda, "soon as I find a place." "Find a place? You have no family to go." Amanda just shook her head. "No parents. My mom died," Amanda said. "My dad took off. No one else. Just my cousin Loan," Amanda said miserably. "I don't like her." "Well, dear, this won't do at all," said Mrs. Beeson. She unzipped her jacket with one quick pull and sat down at the kitchen table, ready to handle Amanda's futures. Nicky noticed a round blue button pinned to her sweaters. The picture on it looked like a little building. "I'm sure I can help," said Mrs. Beeson. Said, "I have several friends in the social work. I will contact them right away. They will be able to place you in a home." She pulled a little phone out of her pocket, a cell phone, Nicky guessed, thought it had different shape from the ones she was used to. Amanda took a step forward. Terror was written on her face. She dropped the piece of bread and clung down the peanuts butter jar and raised her hands like a stop signal in the direction of Mrs. Beeson. "I don't want to go any home," she said. "In 17, I can't get a job. I can't find." "Nonsense," said Mr. Beeson kindly. "Everyone needs a home." She paused, her mouth half open. An idea seems to be forming behind her eyes. Her eyes brown roses. "In fact," she said, "I know someone who needs a helper right now. A dear friend of mine. What kind of helper? Asked Amanda suspiciously. A householder keeper, Mrs. Beeson said. A live-in helper. I don't know, said Amanda. She hung up her shoulders and squatted at the floor. The friend I was speaking of, said Mrs. Beeson with a little smile, is Miss Althea Tower. Amanda's eyes went wide. She stood up straight. She said in a voice that cracked in the mind, the prophet? That's right. You know she is very well unwell. And the girl we hired her to take care of her is leaving. You could stay with her, couldn't you? You were so good with the professors. In just 5 seconds, Amanda had become a whole new person. Her face shone with eagerness. She straightened her shoulders, hooked a scary look of her hair behind her coat. I could do it, she said. I would really like to. Wonderful, said Mrs. Beeson. If you can get ready, I will take you over the right now and see if we can make a arrangement. Nikki could see that Mrs. Brenda Beeson was a kind of a person who moved fast and fake the firm decisions. She seemed nice too. So after Amanda went upstairs, Nikki decided to ask some questions. But before she could say anything, there was a sudden pealing in a tiny bell. Mrs. Beeson put her phone to her. Here. Hello, yes, Dorley. What it is? She listened. No, dear, I'm afraid not. A pause. I know you're anxious, but honey, Althea cannot see the people futures on demand. No, she is a prophet, not a fortune teller. Another pause. I am sorry, Dolly dear, but it is out of the question. Please don't ask me again. She put down the phone and signed. I get these requests all the time, she said. People are so nervous. Nikki plunked ahead with her questions. Mrs. Beeson, she said, do you think something terrible is going to happen? Like in the prophet vision? Well, I don't want to scare you, honey, said Mrs. Beeson, but I'm afraid it might. There is a lot of people in the world right now who wants to hurt us. The force of an evil or strong, but our country is standing up against them. And here in an Yonwood we are too. She picked up the peanut butter jar and a loaf of bread and put them back in the cupboard. She brushed some crumbs off the table. Our forfeit, she said. It is helping us. I know, said Nikki. Amanda told me. Did she tell you about the hotlines? Mrs. Beeson asked. It is a recorded phone message. Every day people can call 777 to hear her latest words and learn what to do about them. If there is something urgent, I can buzz their phone so they all get the messages immediately. I arranged it all with my dad phones. She showed Nikki the little phone, which had more tiny screens and a tiny buttons and sliding bit than any phone Nikki had seen. I love the high-tech gadgets, don't you? That stands for do 1,000 things. I doesn't really do a quite 1,000, but just about. She pressed a button. Wait a second, that is the temperature. She pressed another button. There was so, nearly 11. Where is that girl? I need to go home. But Nikki wasn't through asking the question. She spoke quietly. You know what, Mrs. Beeson? She said. I really want to do something to help the world. Then you have come to the right place, said Mrs. Beeson. Putting her phone back in her pocket, she smiled. Everyone here is trying to help the world. We are all quite passionate about it. We have had so many town meetings and the church discussion and special oaths. Well, dangerous times brings the people together. There are still a few who clings to their selfish together ways, though, and they were troubling. Even one can ruin everything, but just the way one motley strawberry in a basket can mess up all the rest. Amanda stepped sounded on the stairs, and Mrs. Beeson stood up. But Nikki had to ask one more question. What should I do? Mrs. Beeson was pulling on her jacket. She stuck her red cap on her head and pulled her ponytail out through the gap in the back. Do, she said. We will let see. You might let me know if you happen to notice any trouble spots. You mean? Nikki said. A trouble spot might be like what? Amanda came into the kitchen. Here I am, she said. She had one nice clothes and her hair was carefully combed. You look lovely, honey, said Mrs. Beeson. I will get my car. Meet me in the front of a house. But Mrs. Beeson, said Nicky urgently, what would a trouble spot be? Mrs. Beeson paused in a doorway. Her eyes grew seriously. You look like for the sinners. Nicky, she said, it is one of the things that the prophet says most often. No sinners, but she says no sinners. Sinners, said Nicky. You mean like the lawbreakers? Yes, but not only them, said Mrs. Beeson. Something they are not actually breaking a law, and still you have a sense of and wrongness about them. You can't just feel it. Mrs. Beeson paused for a moment to zip up her jacket. Do you know of a man named Hoyk Mycote who lives down on a Raven Road? No, said Nicky. I don't know anyone. No, of course, you wouldn't. But he is an example. There is something about him, a whiff of an wrongness. It is very strong. She started down the hall but stopped and looked back. Do you love God? Nicky was surprised. Sure, she said. I guess so. The truth was, she had never thought about it. Her parents hadn't taken her to the church, so she didn't know much about God. Excellent, said Mrs. Beeson. We have to love God more than anything else. If you do, then you will do fine. You can help us build a shield of an goodness with another beaming smile. She turned and headed out the door. It isn't this just amazing? Amanda said when Mrs. Beeson had left. I was so scared when she came to the door. I mean, she is a real nice person, but I thought sure she was going to send me to a home. I never thought of something like this could happen. Me taking care of an prophet. Who do I look at? All right, you look fine, said Nicky. But what about Otis? Oh Lord, shit, Amanda said. Can you take care of him? He might hurt my glances to get hired. Can you feed him and take him out a couple of times a day just for a little while? Please, please, please. And of course, Nicky said she would. As soon as Amanda has gone off with Mrs. Beeson, Nicky found a pencil and a scrap of a paper and write down these words. Sinners, wrongness, forces of evil, the shield of goodness. Those were the things to remember. It was so perfect. She could accomplish her goal 3 by helping to battle the forces of the evil and build the shield of an goodness. Just the very word made her feel like a warrior. Maybe she should give something up the way everyone else was. If she did, would she have to love to give to God? She thought probably her love for the God was little weak, since she didn't know much about him and hadn't really thought about where she would love him or not. It was hard to love someone invisible that you have never met. Giving up something might strengthen her devotion. What could she give up? She would think about it. Then she ran up to the nursery to see Otis. She knelt down and held him up by his front paws so that they could look at each other's eyes to eyes. Otis, she says Amanda had to go away. I'm taking care of you, okay? Otis gazed back at her. His eyes were like a shiny, deep brown marbles. He cocked his back as if trying to make a sense of her words. It was going to be a little risky taking care of Otis. She had have to keep Crystal from coming up to the third floor, and she had have to feed the Otis and take him outside without letting Crystal see him. She hated leaving him all alone in the nursery room with nothing to do with but chew the things up. Did dogs get depressed from being all alone too much? She didn't want Otis to be desperate. Luckily, it looked as if Crystal had so many errands to do, and the people to talk to the Nicky could probably be alone at the Green Haven for hours every day. She pulled Otis onto her lap and hugged him. He wiggled out her arms. His small blond body was amazingly strong. And then he sort of danced in the front of her, in the front pass, stretching out straight and painting the air. Oof, he said, and Nikki instantly understood that oof means play. In the closet, she found a little brown shoes that must have belonged to a child years ago. Watch this, Otis, she cried, and she threw the shoes across the room. Otis hurled himself after it. He snatched it and the shoes and ran back to her. He gave it a shake to make sure it was dead, and then he dropped it and waited it, brown eyes up on her, shining with the expectations. They played retrieve the shoes for a long time until Otis got distracted by a spider on the floor. Nicky went downstairs for another cup of hot chocolate and got back to find the Otis in an quiet position, and his back humped and his tail up, a faraway look in his eyes. Just in a time, she squeezed an old magazine put in under his rear end and caught what came out before it could stain the rug. Take him outside twice a day, Amanda had said. She had forgotten. She found a leash hanging in the closet, hooked it to Otis' collar, and led him downstairs and out the kitchen door. While he trotted among the bushes, she looked around. There was a clothesline back here, and a concrete terrace bordered by a low stone wall. In the back of a house was a door that probably led to the basement. She tried it, but it was closed. Once Otis was emptied out, they went back upstairs to the nursery. Nicky wondered if Amanda was having her interview with the prophet at this very moment. She was so curious about the prophet. She longed to meet her. It was almost noon, but Crystal wasn't back yet. So Nikki went into the next room. One of the rooms crammed with the trunks and the boxes. Moving aside a stack of an old magazines, she opened the biggest, oldest looking trunk and saw a great jumble of the stuff, mostly the paper inside. She scooped up an armful and took it back to the nursery room to look through. No one had bothered to put any of these things in order or even to store them neatly so they didn't get bent and crumpled. There were a lot of an old Christmas cards, some faded the snapshots of babies and bunches of an ancient bills and a report card and a school papers. Towards the bottom of the pile, she found an envelope so old that its edges had some apart. Inside was a photograph and a cupboard backing. She had just time to glance at it and to notice that something about it was car pulled up outside. Nikki put the photograph back in its envelope. She scooped her pills off the window seat and put them in the toy cabinet where Otis couldn't get at them. You sleep, she said to Otis. She left the room, closed the door behind her, and crammed some rags under it. Then she raced downstairs. Crystal was just coming in the front door. She took her coat off and hung it on an coat rack in the hall. Well, I will meet the real estate agent, she said. Lean Cadwell. His name is quite nice and helpful. He is very tall and has a funny. She smiled at Nikki and what had happened here. Nikki opened her mouth and then quickly closed it. Oh, I have just been wandering around, she said. I love how big and spacious this house is, don't you? It is big, all right, said Crystal. There is something nice about having a space to be spread out. Of course, it is just more space that has to be cleaned. Nikki was about to mention the beautiful curving staircases and the view of an mountain from the back windows. But just then the phone rang. Crystal picked up. Hello, she said. Rachel, are you? How are you? It was Nikki's and a mother. Hiya, said Crystal. I know it is really very hard. I want to talk to her, Nikki whispered loudly. You did, said Crystal. What did it say? What says? Nikki said. Huh, said Crystal. Odd. Here tell Nikki she wants to know. Mom, said Nikki into the phone. Are you okay? I'm okay, said her mother, weary voice. I got a postcard from your father. You did? What did he say? Not much. It hope he is all right. It just wish that I know he where he was. Read it to me, Nikki said. But wait a second. I need a find a pencil. I want to write it down. So her mother read her the postcard and Nikki write down what she said. Then they talked for a while about her mother's job, about the bomb alert in the city, and about how cold it was. Nikki said how much she loved the green heaven and was terribly mistaken it would be salad. When they said goodbye, Nikki would have felt sad if she didn't had the word of the postcard to study. Dear Rachel and Nikki, all is fine here. Work is going well. Wish I could tell you where I am, but it's strictly forbidden. My love to you both, Dad. P.S. Three sparrows came to the bird feeders total. Her mother was right. It didn't say much, though it did tell her something new about her father. She haven't known that he was interested in the birds at all. The short way home. Gower couldn't concentrate at the schools that day. The classroom was alive with a whisper about the terrorist in the woods and the bloody letter and what Brenda Beeson said it meant. Even his teachers seemed nervous. Grover thought. She kept a glance out the window and twice she came up with the wrong answer to the problem she was explaining. After school, still more kids surrounded Grover and asked him to describe what he had seen. He wished he could tell them that the prohibit herself had come to examine the blood cloth. She was the one they have curious about, but no one had seen her since she had been her visions. Beside the doctors, no one but Mrs. Beeson and her small devoted group. Governor remembered seeing at Althea Towers in a bookshop something before her vision, but she hadn't been interested then. Just a sort of an fully haired woman with an rimless glasses and dust on her fingertips from handling used books. She would always smiling at him when he went in there, but she never said much. She was a pale as if she recalled and wispy and had a quiet voice. But now she would like to get a glimpse of her to see her eyes look socked and her hair frizzled like an electric wire, to see if her face looked blasted or frozen into an astonishment or whatever look there might be a face of a person who had been sawn on a vision by the god. It is really was the god. Grover didn't know, and mostly he didn't care as long as the result didn't affect him. He ended up spending some time talking about to the kids in the schoolyard that he was in danger of getting home late. He was supposed to be home by the 3:30 to help his grandmother with his kids. If he got home after his mother did, she had to tell his father, and his father was sure to yell at him. So he decided to do something he rarely did, because it was a bit of a risk that takes the short way home. The short way home was through the hot makered backyards. Actually, the backyard was too small a wood for it. Hot Mackord house lays within a large and Bramley acreage. He had 2 or 3 times more land than the most of their neighbors. As the rear part of it, a few slat of a fence had fallen sideways, making a hole big enough for a skinny boy to get through. Grover, holding his school books close to his chest, was just sinky enough. Crossing the hot cart's yard cut a good 5 minutes off the time it took to get home. Grover knew this because he had done it a few times before. The only risk part was that at the back corner of the property, where the house stood, that he would be within the view of some windows if anyone happened to be standing by them. But so much overgrown scurvy grew up the back of the house, and the windows were so coated with the dust and the grime that he didn't think the chance of being seen was very great. This time, though, he was wrong. As he came up behind the houses, staying as close to the fence as he would, and trying not to crunch too much on the fallen leaves. An upstairs window flew open. The deep voice of Hot Mako rang out. Halt, trespasser! I have you in my sight. Vacate these premises instantly. Brewer stopped so fast that he dropped his book. He froze, hoping the bushes would hide him. He waited, watching the open window. Did Hoyt mean he had a rifle trained on him? Would he actually shoot it? Gower did know. So he stayed where he was until finally the window closed. Then he waited a little longer, and at the last he bent to pick his book up and moved on, staying in the shadow, setting each foot down with great care, until he came to the gravel right that leads out to the street. Then he ran. Hoyt Mycott was one of the Yarnwood's oddsters. He had moved there about 10 years ago from an university town somewhere. For a long or so after he had bought the houses, workers from out of in town he had come every day, and sounds of drilling and swagging and hammering had issued from inside. People thought maybe Hoyt's family was going to live with him, but no. Hoyt lived alone. Sometimes he went away for a week at a time, leaving the grate across his driveway padlocked. When he was at a home, he seemed almost never to have the visitors, although a few times Grover had seen a dark green sedan turning in at his driveway, in which there was always two men in the suits. There wasn't probably the tax collectors, Grover thought. It wasn't like Howie Macott would have the friends. He was tall and grand, with a cave-in cheeks and a dark halo around his eyes. He walked with his shoulders stooped and his head ran forward as if he were looking for something to pounce on. And in his way, he did the pounce on everything's. Everything met with his disapproval. One day, when Hoyt showed up at the market or the post offices or the drugstores, Grover had seen him tucking at a loud children's, shaking his fist at the car that comes too closer to him, and scolding the clerks for being rude. He also scoffed off everything Mrs. Beeson said about the prohibit's vision. Orders from the heavens, he would say, pursing her lips. Nonsense, she doesn't know. I am the expert on the heaven, not her. If you want to know about the celestial matters, ask me. But no one ever did ask him. As far as Grover could see, hardly anyone ever spoke to him at all, if they could help it. When Grover got home only a little bit late, he found his grandmother in the living room in her usual spot, the armchair by the heater with the baby on her lap. All around her, little kids of various ages crawled and toddled, babbled and cried and stretched. The TV was on. A newsman was saying that the Protestants had set a deadline of 1 week, exactly 7 days for the Flanax nations to deactivate their missiles. Otherwise, the United States would have no choices but to. His grandmother aimed at the remote and flicked off the TV. Heard there more trouble in the town, she said. Grover dumped his books on a side table. It was the first one there, Granny Carey, he said. It was one who told Andy. Good for you, said his grandmother, on the top of things as usual. One of the Grover's little brother waked his sister with the stuffed animals. The little girl wailed. The baby on his grandmother's lap started to cry. This was how it always was at Grover's house. He had 6 brothers and the sisters all hang up, who created a constant uproars. His father worked as an handyman and his mother worked at a dress shop. So his grandmother was a only who minded the children's. Grover has to mind them too. When he came home from the school, all of this meant that he was always short of time. Time for the homework and time for the other things that were more important to him than the homework. Look here, Grover, Granny Carey said. I found some good news, one for you. She leaned over and picked up a stack of a magazine from the floor. There is one that gets you $10,000. Another one gets you a car, but you could trade that for the cash. Great, said Grover. He took the top magazines and opened it to the page his grandmother had Duggard, the fabulous Drawfebbery Sweep Stackers. It is in a big red letter. 100 offer prizes. Grand prizes is $10,000. He read the fine prints. All you have to do was to collect a 5-box top from an Drawferry cornmeal products and fill out on an empty blank. Easy. His family ate a ton of corn muffins and cornbreads. He could collect the 5 top with less than a week. For this one here, said Granny Carey, opening another magazine, you have to write a paragraph. She showed it to him. Why buy Armstrong pickles? Said the ad. You tell us. 100 words or less. The grand prize was $500, which would be more than enough. This is good, said Grover, moving the magazine away from reaching the fingers of his little brother. Thanks, I will probably win a whole lot of these and have money left over. I will buy a catalyst. You better not, said Granny Clary. You can buy me some new slippers. These one are getting worn out. She stuck out her feet, on which she was wearing the yellow slippers with a duck head on them. They were a little ragged around the edges. Okay, said Grover. He had be happy to buy this grandmother anything else she wanted. At 5:30, his mother came home, looking tired and carrying a bag of groceries, somebody learning around in the woods. She said, setting the bags down and taking off her coats. I know it, said Grover. Do you get up there? She said. You stay around here for a change. She stated, taking the boxes and the cans from the bag and putting them away. A little later, Grover's father came home. He came in a back door, leaving his toolbox on the porch. Heard about a break-in, he said. Yes, said everyone. Granny and his men ought to get up there in the woods and flush that guy out, said Grover's father. Take their rifles with them. Don't talk about the rifles, said Grover's mother. It scares me. His father just shrugged. Serious time calls for serious solutions, he said. A shield of goodness is better protection, his mother said. Fine, said his father. You work on being good, I will keep the gun loaded. It could be just some poor wandering tramp up there, said his grandmother. Trouble is, said his father. We don't know. He could be tramp. He could be a guy scooping out a bomb sites. Do you want to take the risk? Grover noticed a smear of grease on the side of his father's neck. Probably he had been doing a plumbing job today. He would do just about anything, plumbing, carpentry, electrical work. He always had a lot of a job and he always came home tired and slightly grumpy in the evening. I'm going down to the shed, said Grover. There was still at least half an hour before dinner, and he wanted to use it. Now listen here, said his father. You waste a lot of time fooling around in that shed. What about your homework? Don't tell me you don't have any. I do, but I can't do it later, said Grover. What comes first, getting ready for your future or fuddling with your little hobbies? Grover's father put one foot up on the chair and untied his shoes. If you are going to do something useful with your life, you have to get to started. I am going to do something useful, Grover said. Not the way you are going. You are not, said his father, untying the other shoes and letting this thump to the floor. He started into its rant Grover had heard 1,000 times. You can have to think practical. The world is headed for the disaster. I think we can say that for sure. But afterwards, assume the human race survives, there is going to be a big need for the builders, architects, engineers. Study a little harder, and you could be one of them. But Grover had another idea. He picked up his books and went back to his room. He flopped on his bed. Instead of going down to the sheet, he put the finishing touches on his application tonight, the one that was going to change his life. It was in a slim blue notebook he carried with him everywhere. But where was the notebook? He had his English book, his maths book, his history book, but not his blue notebook. He had left it at the school. He wouldn't have done that. Could he have? A terrible thought struck him. His blue note, he suddenly knew, was lying in the weed behind the horrible house of Hockett Mycott. A crack in the sky. He was going to have to go tonight while it was dark. Otherwise, Howard would see him and try to shoot him again. This gave Groovers a juicy feelings in his stomach, which made it harder to eat his dinner. When the dinner was over and the little kids were in the bed, his parents settled on the couch and flicked on the TV. A government spokesman was talking about the deadline the president had set for the Fanlix nation to agree the United States demands, and that if the demands weren't met, the consequence would be serious. But no one should be alarmed because emergency measures were planted and I'm going outside for a while, Grover said. All right, his mother said without looking at him. Be back in by 9:30. Grover went out the back door as if he were going across the yard to his head. But instead, he circled around the side of a house and headed down the street. Luckily, it wasn't raining, he thought. Rain would turn his blue notes into a soggy rag. And lucky the moon was just silver in the sky, shedding hardly any light. That would help him hide from Hoyt's sharp eyes. Grover hurried down hills. He wanted to get this over with. If he hadn't already filled in so much of the application forms, he could just leave it there and send for another one. But he had put in his hours trying to get it just right. And besides, the deadlines was only a week away. He wouldn't have a time to send for another one, get it done, and turn it on the time. He had to find the one he had lost. He passed the last houses on his street and turned left on an Ravens Road. It was darker here because there were fewer houses shining the light from their window out in the night. In less than 5 minutes, he came to the drive that leads back in an Hoyt's land and started walking up it. His screw crunched on the gravel, a sound that seems much too loud. He tried to walk on the edges of the drive, where the gravel merged into the dirt, but his feet kept getting tangled in the brambles that grew there. He crept along to the left, moving towards the back of the house, staying as close to the fence as he could. The house loomed tall and dark. Only one window on the story was lit. With thorns on the stickers catching at his sleeves, Grover made his way through the thickest of the brush to the place where that afternoon he had frozen at the sound of an Hoyt's voice. He was sure this was where he had dropped his book. His notebook should still be right there on the ground, as long as Hoyt hadn't found it and thrown it into the trash, or some animals hadn't taken it away to the shed for its nest. There was a straight line of a sight from here to the top window of the house, the one that now glowed yellow around the edges of an darkened aside. He dropped to his knees. Where was the darkened things? The shadow of the trees and the bushes were so thick here that he could hardly see at all. He would have to find it by the field. He ran his hands over the ground. Pebbles, clumps of and cold dirt, scratchy weeds, dry fallen leaves, but no notebooks. He held back a groan of an frustration. He had to find it, because if he didn't find it, he wouldn't be able to go. Even if he did get the money, and he had to go because his whole futures depend on it. He was furious with himself for dropping it, and at the moment his finger touched something smooth, he reached farther and felt the spiral wires. His notebook. He grabbed it and stood up. Carefully, he rifled the pages, feeling for the lost one. Yes, it was there, tucked into the middle, just where he had put it. All right, now to get out of here. He turned back toward the driveway and felt his way forward between the tree trunks and the brush. He crept behind the Hawkins' back car, parked near the corner of the house, at the spot where he had have gone out to open. He paused and checked the house again. It was still all dark except for the rectangle of a light around the top floor window. But as he watched, the lights went out. Straggle. Grover stepped back into the shadow and stood still for a moment. It might just the Howard had turned off the light to sleep, or might it has been that he had heard something and was about to peer out of his window. Grover waited and watched, and an odd thing happened. At first he thought he was imagining it. It was so faint. A light seems to be growing behind the curtains and shuttered windows on the ground floor. It was a bluish light, like the moonlight. It gleamed very faintly across the edges of the window, in the gaps between the shades and the frames, until a narrow, pale bluish rectangular appeared around all the ground floor windows. What was it? Did the Howard had 20 television then that went on all at once? Was doing some weird sort of experiment? Whatever it was, it gave Groover an eerie feeling. He stood still for a moment, staring. Then, as if his ears had suddenly been scuffed with the cotton, the whole world seems to be go silent. And in the sky over the Hawk My Court's house, a brilliant line, a thin as a wire, shot across the darkness. It was there for less than a second. It vanished, and the sound came back, rustling leaves, a distant calling birds. But Groover had seen it. It wasn't his imagination. It had looked like a long, narrow crack, as if the two great round halves of the night sky had slid apart just for a second, just enough to let through a light that was on the other side. It was the strangest thing he had never seen. But something else happened. The blue light continued to shine behind the woods. The houses was silent. The sky stayed black. After another few minutes, Groover clutched his notebooks tightly and moved towards the driveway, quiet as a cat and slow, until he got far enough from the house. He dashed along the driveway edges down to the Raven Road, where he set out for the home. At the Prophet's house, Saturday morning, Crystal blustered everywhere, checking on the things, adding the items to her list. Plumbers arrived and began cranking away in the kitchen and in the bathrooms. Painters arrived and started sanding down window sills and spreading out the traps in the parlor. Crystal marched from the room to the room, giving the directions. Now and then the people stood by to tell her how sorry they had been about the Professor Green. Some of them stood chatting for a long time. Nikki could see that they were curious about Crystal and maybe a little suspicious. They asked all her a kind of a questions. Are you married, dear? Will you be coming to live in yon woods? What church do you attend? Have you met our Mrs. Benson yet? Until Crystal said it was lovely talking with them, but she had so much to do that she must say goodbye. I'm, sh- I'm sure off to see some antique dealers, she said to Nicky when they were gone, about selling some of his flashy furnitures. After that, I have a meeting with the real estate agents. I will see you sometimes this afternoon. As soon as Crystal had left, Nicky ran past the painter and up the stairs. She opened the hall door, then the nursery door, and there was an artist waiting for her, looking up with his round brown eyes and wagging her rear end. His short, comma-shaped tail pointing at the ceilings. She took up him downwards, and when he was finished, brought him back inside. In the kitchen, she made herself a cup of a hot chocolate. As she was doing that, the telephone rang. She hardly ever answered the telephone here, since it was never for her. The answering machine answer if Crystal wasn't home. Usually, the voice on the answering machine belonged to someone talking about the house repairs. But this time, her voice was Amanda's. Hello, it said. Well, this is Amanda Stokes, and I. Nikki snatched up the receiver. Amanda, she said, it's me. Oh, good, said Amanda. I didn't know what to say. if it was your aunt getting the message. Did you get the job with the prohibit? I did, said Amanda. I'm so lucky, but I'm calling up because I need my stuff. Can you bring it to me? Sure, Nikki said. Just tell me what to bring. It is all in my suitcase under the bed. Expect don't bring the books that are in there. Those are the ones I gave up. You can have them. Okay, I will come right now. What is the prohibit's address? It's 248 Crackle Street, Amanda said. She explained how to get there and said thanks. And Nikki hung up and did a little dance of an excitement right there in the hall. She was going to see the prophet house. She was going to meet the prophet herself. She took Otis upstairs. She pulled out Amanda's suitcase from beneath the bed and opened it up. Then rummaged through it to find the books, and also because she was curious. Underwear, socks, and a striped flannel nightgowns, some t-shirts, and a few pairs of pants. A floppy pink stuffed kitchen, as old as its fur, was mostly worn away. A blatted postcard with a picture of a beach. Nikki couldn't resist reading it. In a big, round handwriting, it said, Dear Pumpkin, what a great place. Lots of beaches. See you soon. Your Mama. The date on the postcards was 12 years ago. Nikki wondered if it was all Amanda's had on her mother. She found the book underneath everything else. There was a four of them, all the paper bags. She picked one up. On the cover was a woman with a hair like a black waterfalls, snowing in the arms of a man who was gazing at her hungrily. It was called The Heaven in His Arms. Another one was called as Heart in the Flames. Its cover shows a clasped together couple standing on a wide wind-shaped cliff with the blazing sunset in the sky behind them. All the books were like that. They have looked interesting. She would read them herself. That might be help her with the goal too. She put everything else back into the suitcase, went downstairs, edging past as a carpenter repairs the front door, and set off for the prohibit house. It was blustery morning. Big heap of a cloud rushed across the sky, and the wind was chilly. A few dead leaves skittered along the sideways. Nikki turned on the main street. Down sometimes seemed to be going on. Clusters of people stood here and there on the sidewalks, talking excitedly. As Nikki passed the drugstore, she saw that the TV inside was on and people have gathered around it and were listening to the news. There were more people around the TV, in the video store, and also at the gauzy corner cafe. The president must be making some kind of an announcement. She could see his seldom face and a white hair on the screen. But she didn't want to stop and listen to him right now. She wanted to get on to the prohibit house. Later, she could find out what he had said. She walked a 4 blocks up the grassy street to number 248. It was a neat white house with a front porch, more or less like the other houses on the street, except that there was some bushes of an limb flowers tied on the fences, along with a Christmas tree angle, a couple of an holy looking pictures, and a couple of an handwritten signals. One said Althea R. Prohib, and the another one said We Believe. A bird feeder hung from an porch roof, but there were no seats in it. The curtains in the all windows were closed. Nikki rang the bell, and after a moment, Amanda opened the door. Oh, hi, she said, reaching for the suitcase. Thanks for bringing this. You're welcome, Nikki said. Well, said Amanda, see you later. She took a step back and started to close the door. But can I come in? Nikki said. Can I meet the prohib? She tried to look past Amanda's into the room. Were there people in there? She thought she heard the sound of voices. Oh gosh, no, said Amanda. Her eyebrows bunched into worried lines, and she packed up the another step. There is a strict rule. Even if I just speak in her door and said hello in a really soft voice. Oh yeah, even that. I can't let you, Amanda said. I would get into trouble. Well, who gets to visit her? Just Mrs. Beeson and her community. You know, Rebert Loomis and a mayor and a police chief and the others. One of two or them here the most of the time sitting with her. In case she says something important, said Amanda. She glanced back over her shoulders. A couple of an M are here right now. Right now? Yeah, having a meeting about the stuff, she said. You mean she is talking to them? She sort of mumbles, Amanda said, and then they hover over her and listen and whisper about what they think she said. And then they tiptoe out, and sometimes, like now, they stand around in the living room arguing about what she meant. At the moment, a car pulled up at the crab. Oh, yeah, Amanda said. Mrs. Beeson is here. I got to get back to the work. Mrs. Geeson out of a car and blushed up to the door. Excuse me, dears, she said. Urgent business. She pushed past them and disappeared into the house. I have to go, Amanda said. But listen, how is Otis? He is fine, Nicky said. I'm getting up my nervous to ask Mrs. Beeson if I can have him here, said Amanda. Nicky heart snapped. She had already forgotten that Otis wasn't hers. But I don't want to think that she is going to let me. Amanda went on. So I don't know. Do you think you? Oh yes, said Nicky, revealed. I will take care of him. I don't mind at all. Don't worry about it. Her heart sprang up again. She said goodbye and headed down the path. Clouds sailed across the sun. Turning the day dark, she hurried to keep warm. Down Crackle Street and past the park to the main street. Maybe she would find out now what the president announcement has been. She made her way towards the Gauzy Corner cave, thinking she could go in and ask someone there. But before she got there, she heard a sort of a buzz in the air, like a distant swarm of bees. All around her people stopped in their tracks and pulled the cell phones from their pockets and purses. What was happening? It must be the news from Mrs. Beeson, maybe about the urgent business that had taken her to the Prophet house. She had to know. Who could she ask? She spotted a red-haired boy wearing glasses with the heavy frames. He was coming out of a cafe carrying a doughnut and had his phone pressed to his ear. He looked about her age or a little older. She asked him. She stepped up beside him and said, Excuse me, into the ear that didn't have the phone against it. He turned and looked at her. What is going on? Nicky said. Can you tell me? He frowned. Wait, he said, holding up the lamp with a donut. He was still listening instantly. He waited. Finally, he folded up his phone. Who are you? He said. I don't know you. She explained who she was. He started at her, suspicious for a moment, but he must have decided that she couldn't be a terrorist. But he said, I'm Martin. Did you hear the president's announcement? No, said Nicky. Why did he say? What did he say? Well, look, said Martin. I have got into my dart. He flicked a tiny switch on his phone, and on a tiny screen, the tiny face of a president appeared. He looks grim. His face was grayish, as if he hadn't slept or eaten well for a while. 6 days remand, he said, in a tiny version of his usual voices. Before times run for the Phoenix nations, they have remained uncooperative. Therefore, I am asking all the directions and directors of the defense to activate the emergencies plans in a case of an attack in the intimate. He went on and about the equations and shaders and troop movements, and he ended the usual way. Let us pray to the God for the safety of our people and the success of our endeavors. Nicky gulped. She looked up for a little screen. So it that why? She began, but she stopped because something strange was happening. All up the down the street, the light in the stories were going off, one after the another. The windows went dark. What is going on? She said. It is because of Mrs. Gibson bulletin, said the Martin. She had just figured out a new instruction from the prophet. See, for a long time the prophet had been saying no lies, no lines, no lights. But no one could tell which the Mrs. Beeson thought it was no lies. because it is bad to tell lies. But now she realizes it must be no lies because that matches up with what the president just said. It does, obviously, said Martin, folding up his phone and putting it in his pocket. The president is warning us about an attack. It might come any minute. If we turn off our lights out, we won't be seen from the air. Nikki looked up and down the main street. It seems almost like the night, with all the windows dark and the sky clouded over. For the first time, she felt a real shiver of fear at the war that might come. It must have shown, because Martin said, "You shouldn't worry too much. There isn't distraction coming, but we are probably safe here." You mean because of Probit? That is right. It is like having a phone line directed to God. As long as we follow the direction, we should have been okay, even though there is a terrorist in the world. There is? Martin nodded. He broke into the restaurant just yesterday morning. That was awful, Nikki said. She had thought that she had escaped all by coming to the Yon Ode. Clearly, she had been wrong. Martin was peering at her as if trying to decide what kind of creature she was. "Do you love God?" he said, having asking been the question asked him the question once before. Nikki was prepared. "Oh yes," she said, "I really do." Martin smiled. His teeth were white and even, and Nikki noticed that his eyes behind his glasses were hazel, an interested color that went well with his red hair. "That is good," he said. "Well, I have to get going. See you." He strode away, leaving Nikki standing there on a transgetical, darkened street beneath the darkening sky. She felt excited and uneasy at the same time. She met a boy that was a progress of a second goal. But the danger to the world had just got worse, which made the goal 3, doing something to help, most urgent than ever. Thank you.